Mosé, it was supposed to be a routine palace briefing, another carefully staged royal update wrapped in smiles and tradition. But when senior aides confirmed Prince George's unprecedented new role beginning in 2026, even veteran courtiers were left stunned. The timing, the secrecy, and the unmistakable urgency behind the decision revealed something far bigger unfolding inside the House of Windsor. And according to insiders, this was not merely preparation for the future. It was the beginning of a royal stay. Nobody expected this soon. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For weeks, whispers had been circulating quietly through the corridors of Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace alike. At first, they were dismissed as little more than the usual royal speculation that surrounds the future heirs of the monarchy. But then came the confirmation that changed everything. Palace officials, speaking unusually measured language, acknowledged that Prince George would begin taking on expanded royal responsibilities starting in 2026. No dramatic announcement, no grand balcony appearance, just a carefully controlled statement delivered with the kind of restraint that, within royal circles, often signals something far more serious beneath the surface. And almost immediately, questions began erupting across Britain. Why now? Why would the palace accelerate George's preparation years ahead of many insiders expected? Reports suggest the decision had been under discussion behind closed doors for months, with senior aides quietly reshaping schedules, adjusting long-term royal planning, and preparing constitutional advisors for what one insider reportedly described as a historic transition phase. It was not simply about introducing the young prince to public life. George had already stood beside his parents at major events. He had already appeared on balconies, attended coronations, and represented continuity for the next generation. This was something entirely different. Sources close to palace administrative circles claim Prince William and Princess Catherine were personally involved in every stage of the discussions. And according to various interpretations of those private meetings, the conversations were not easy. William, shaped forever by the trauma and scrutiny that followed Princess Diana's death, reportedly understood better than anyone the burden now approaching his eldest son. There was deep concern, insiders whisper, about how quickly George's life could transform once the machinery of the crown truly began to close around him. But despite those concerns, the process accelerated. Royal commentators began noticing subtle changes long before the announcement became public. George's appearances became more carefully choreographed. His positioning beside William at ceremonial events appeared increasingly deliberate. Even royal security arrangements, according to reports from media insiders, underwent quiet revisions over recent months. It was as though the institution itself had begun preparing the future king for a more central role while hoping the public would not yet notice the shift taking place in plain sight. And then there was the shadow hanging over everything. King Charles. Although palace officials continue projecting stability, speculation surrounding the king's health has only intensified since his cancer. When diagnosis became public in early 2024. Every reduced appearance, every schedule adjustment, every carefully worded statement has fueled growing anxiety about the future of the monarchy. Insiders now claim that behind the polished royal image lies a mounting constitutional urgency, one that has forced senior figures within the House of Windsor to think not just about the next decade, but about the next generation. That is why many royal observers believe Prince George's new role is not symbolic alone. It is strategic, deeply strategic. Across Britain and throughout Commonwealth circles, reactions exploded almost instantly. Some viewed the move as reassuring, a sign that the monarchy was proactively securing its future during an uncertain chapter. Others, however, saw something more troubling. Critics questioned whether a boy still years away from adulthood was being pushed too quickly toward the immense pressures of royal duty. And yet within palace walls, those concerns appear secondary to a far larger objective, preserving stability at all costs. Because according to insiders familiar with the discussions, the decision to elevate George so early was not made lightly. It followed months of private tensions, constitutional anxiety, and whispered fears about the monarchy's future. For months, blacked-out vehicles entered Kensington Palace long after midnight, while aides refused to explain why constitutional advisors, security officials, and senior courtiers were suddenly gathering in private. Then came the breakthrough. Insiders now claim Prince George's future role had been under emergency discussion far earlier than the public realized. Something inside the monarchy had shifted, and the palace was racing against time to prepare the young heir before the world noticed. At first, the unusual movements around the palace attracted little public attention. After all, secrecy had always been woven into the survival instincts of the crown. Quiet meetings, unashed closed doors, carefully controlled narratives. That was the language of the monarchy. But according to reports emerging from royal insiders, what unfolded during the final months of 2025 was unlike anything palace veterans had witnessed in years. Constitutional advisors were reportedly summoned with increasing urgency. Senior royal aides canceled private engagements without explanation. Security procedures around Kensington Palace quietly intensified, and behind that tightening wall of silence, one topic allegedly dominated every conversation: Prince George. The discussions, sources suggest, were not ceremonial alone. They were strategic, deeply strategic. Insiders now whisper that Prince William and Princess Catherine became increasingly concerned about the long-term stability of the monarchy as King Charles's health struggles continued casting uncertainty across the institution. Publicly, the palace projected calm. Carefully timed appearances and reassuring statements attempted to preserve an image of continuity. But privately, according to various interpretations from those close to royal operations, fears were growing that the crown needed to accelerate preparations for the next generation much sooner than anyone had anticipated. And that realization changed everything. William, shaped by years of watching the monarchy survive crisis after crisis, reportedly began seeking direct guidance from constitutional experts regarding George's future responsibilities. Not future, nigh in the distant sense. Immediate future. Discussions allegedly focused on how the young prince could gradually assume a more visible symbolic role without triggering public alarm. There were questions about ceremonial appearances, state functions, diplomatic events, and how George's presence could quietly reassure both Britain and the Commonwealth during a period of increasing uncertainty surrounding the royal leadership. But none of it could happen openly. That, insiders claim, was why Palace staff were instructed to maintain an extraordinary level of silence. Even within royal households, information reportedly became compartmentalized. Senior aides spoke only on encrypted lines. Schedules were adjusted at the last minute. Some staff members allegedly discovered major changes only hours before implementation. One former royal correspondent even described the atmosphere as controlled panic hidden beneath polished tradition. And looming behind every conversation was the shadow of history itself. Several royal experts began drawing comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II's own wartime preparation as heir to the throne. Long before she became queen, Elizabeth had been quietly educated in constitutional procedure during Britain's darkest hours, trained not merely to wear the crown, but to preserve it through instability. According to reports, some within the palace now viewed George through that same lens, a child being prepared not for ceremony, but for endurance. That comparison inside royal circles, because unlike previous generations, George is growing up during a period when the monarchy faces pressure from every direction. Public trust fluctuates constantly. Internal divisions have spilled into global headlines. Prince Harry and Meghan's ongoing separation from the institution continues fueling tensions around the world. And as King Charles balances the burden of monarchy with serious health concerns, the palace appears increasingly aware. When Princess Anne emerged, that the future cannot simply be delayed until the next reign officially begins, which is why many insiders believe Charles himself ultimately approved the accelerated timeline. Reports suggest the king understood the symbolism behind elevating George earlier than expected. It was not simply about duty. It was about reassurance, stability, survival. The message being quietly crafted behind palace walls was unmistakable. The monarchy was already preparing its future king long before the public realized the urgency had begun. And while the public saw only polished smiles and balcony appearances, George himself was quietly being prepared for pressures few children could possibly imagine. When the confirmation finally arrived, it sent shockwaves through royal observers worldwide. Beginning in 2026, Prince George will reportedly assume a far more visible role. Constitutional presence, one insiders describe as the first stage of future kingship. At just 12 years old, the future monarch is unashed, stepping into a world of relentless scrutiny, sacred tradition, and unimaginable expectation. And according to palace veterans, There is no turning back now. The announcement itself was delivered with the calm precision the palace has perfected over generations. No dramatic declarations, no emotional appeals. Just a carefully measured acknowledgement that Prince George would gradually begin assuming a more active public role within the institution of the monarchy. But beneath the restrained, language was a reality impossible to ignore. The House of Windsor was beginning to move its future king closer to the center of royal life far earlier than many had expected, and insiders immediately understood the deeper meaning behind the decision. This was not symbolic theater alone. Reports suggest George is now expected to participate in a growing number of higher-level royal engagements over the coming years, appearing alongside Prince William at events once reserved almost exclusively for senior working royals. Palace advisors are reportedly crafting a long-term visibility strategy designed to slowly introduce the young prince to constitutional life without overwhelming him all at once. Yet, according to those familiar with the planning, the scale of preparation already underway reveals just how serious the palace has become about accelerating George's transition into public duty. And the pressure surrounding that transition is enormous. Unlike previous heirs who entered royal life during periods of relative institutional stability, George is growing up under the shadow of constant uncertainty. The monarchy is no longer protected by unquestioned public loyalty. Every appearance is scrutinized, every silence analyzed, every decision turned into a global headline within minutes. Palace insiders reportedly fear that if the institution fails to project continuity during this fragile period, public confidence could begin to fracture in ways that become impossible to control later. That fear explains why George's preparation is no longer confined to ceremonial appearances alone. Various royal commentators claim discussions are already underway regarding the young prince's constitutional education. Not merely lessons about royal history or protocol, but briefings designed to familiarize him with the mechanics of monarchy itself, the relationship between crown and government, the delicate balance of public duty, and the invisible rules that govern Britain's enmeshed constitutional system. According to reports circulating within royal circles, advisors believe George must begin understanding these responsibilities earlier than originally planned, particularly as Prince William's own role continues expanding amid growing concerns surrounding King Charles's health. And in many ways, history appears to be repeating itself. Royal historians have drawn striking comparisons between George's current trajectory and Prince Charles's own preparation during the final emerged years of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign. Charles, too, was gradually introduced to the machinery of monarchy while still remarkably young, expected to absorb the weight of centuries before most children fully understood themselves. But insiders suggest George's experience may be even more intense, because the modern monarchy faces challenges far more aggressive and unforgiving than those of previous generations. That reality has transformed even George's public appearances into moments of enormous symbolic importance. Each carefully planned engagement now carries a deeper message from the palace: stability, continuity, survival. Royal aides reportedly believe that seeing George beside William reassures both Britain and the Commonwealth that the line of succession remains secure, despite the turbulence surrounding the institution. And according to insiders, that reassurance is becoming increasingly vital as speculation surrounding the future of the monarchy grows louder with every month. Publicly, palace officials continue describing the process as measured preparation, calm, controlled, thoughtful. But behind closed doors, many believe the urgency driving these decisions tells a far more complicated story. Because while the public sees a young prince slowly stepping toward destiny, others inside royal circles see something else entirely: a monarchy quietly preparing itself for a future that may arrive much sooner than anyone is willing to admit. But behind when Princess Anne emerged, carefully scripted palace messaging, some insiders believe the real reason for George's sudden promotion is far more unsettling. Ever since King Charles's cancer diagnosis became public in early 2024, a chilling question has quietly haunted the monarchy. What happens if the transition comes sooner than expected? Now, with Prince George being pushed into a more formal royal role years ahead of schedule, many believe the palace is preparing not just for continuity but for crisis. And those fears are growing louder inside royal circles with every passing month. At first, the palace attempted to project calm. Statements were carefully written. Public appearances were managed with precision. Senior aides insisted the king remained committed to fulfilling his constitutional duties while continuing treatment. But behind the composed language and controlled schedules, reports suggest anxiety had already begun spreading through the highest levels of the institution. Because for all the confidence presented to the world, insiders allegedly understood something deeply unsettling. The monarchy was entering one of its most fragile periods in decades, and the uncertainty surrounding Charles's condition only intensified that fear. Royal watchers began noticing subtle but significant changes almost immediately after the diagnosis became public. Overseas tours were shortened. Several engagements were postponed without detailed explanation. Other appearances were quietly delegated to Mayam, whose role within the institution seemed to expand almost overnight. At first, the adjustments appeared temporary, but as months passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. William was no longer simply supporting the sovereign. According to many observers, he was increasingly functioning like one. That shift sent shockwaves through royal circles. For decades, the monarchy operated around carefully structured timelines. Each transition was meant to unfold gradually. Man emerged, preserving stability while protecting the institution from uncertainty. But insiders now whisper that Charles's health struggles disrupted those calculations entirely. Palace officials reportedly began confronting difficult constitutional questions behind closed doors. What if the king required extended periods away from public duty? What if William needed to assume even greater responsibility sooner than expected? And perhaps most significantly of all, what role would Prince George need to play? Maintaining public confidence during that transition? That is where the atmosphere reportedly became far more urgent. Sources close to royal operations claim George's accelerated preparation is no longer viewed internally as optional. It is seen as necessary. The monarchy, according to various interpretations circulating within palace circles, believes the public must begin emotionally connecting with the next generation now, before instability deepens further. George's growing visibility is, not simply about tradition, it is about reassurance. Every appearance beside William is carefully calculated to send a message that the royal line remains secure, despite the uncertainty hanging over the crown. And privately, insiders admit the pressure has been immense. Although palace officials strongly reject suggestions of panic, several reports indicate there is a very real sense of urgency inside the institution. Senior advisors allegedly fear that even the perception of instability could trigger wider questions about the monarchy's future at a time when public trust already feels increasingly fragile. That fear explains why succession planning discussions have reportedly accelerated with such intensity over the last year. The crown cannot afford hesitation. Not now. History only deepens those anxieties. Royal historians have repeatedly drawn parallels to some of the monarchy's darkest succession crises, moments when illness, uncertainty, and public fear collided behind palace. From the final years of George VI's declining health to the constitutional instability surrounding Edward VIII's abdication, the institution has learned through painful experience that preparation cannot begin too late. And according to insiders, those historical lessons are shaping every major decision now unfolding within the House of Windsor. Yet despite the growing tension, public sympathy toward the royal family has also surged in unexpected ways. Across Britain, many people who once monarchy with distance have responded emotionally to the king's health battle and the visible strain placed upon William and Catherine. Crowds gather with renewed warmth. Support messages flood royal channels. Even critics of the institution have acknowledged the human burden now resting on the shoulders of a family attempting to navigate private suffering beneath relentless public scrutiny. But while constitutional planning and succession fears dominate discussions behind closed doors, the emotional weight of this unfolding transition may rest most heavily on one person in particular. Because amid all the strategy, uncertainty, and palace maneuvering, one figure remains at the emotional center of this story. Princess Catherine. Those closest to Princess Catherine say her greatest fear was never the cameras, the titles, or the pressure of royal life. It was losing George's childhood to the crown. But as preparations for 2026 intensified, insiders claim Catherine accepted a painful reality. The future king could no longer remain shielded from duty, and behind palace gates, she reportedly began shaping George not just into a prince, but into a monarch. For years, Catherine had reportedly worked tirelessly to give her children something previous generations of royals rarely experienced: normality, school runs, family holidays, sporting events, quiet moments away from the machinery of monarchy. According to those close to the Princess of Wales, she understood early, menached on that the crown could consume childhood if left unchecked. She had watched Prince William carry the scars of relentless public scrutiny from an age far too young, and insiders claim she became determined that George would grow up differently, protected not just physically, but emotionally. But the world around them began changing faster than anyone anticipated. As King Charles's health struggles deepened, uncertainty inside the monarchy, the protective barrier Catherine had carefully built around George reportedly started to weaken. Meetings became more frequent, discussions more serious. Palace advisors allegedly began outlining long-term constitutional preparations that no longer felt distant or theoretical. And according to insiders, Catherine slowly realized that shielding George entirely from royal responsibility was no longer possible. The institution needed its future king to begin stepping forward. That realization came with enormous emotional weight, reports suggest. Catherine became deeply involved in shaping how George's transition into public life would unfold, insisting that every step be handled with caution and balance. She reportedly pushed palace aides to ensure that royal preparation did not erase George's sense of identity as a child. Even as constitutional tutoring intensified and ceremonial planning accelerated, insiders claim Catherine fought to preserve routines that kept her son grounded outside the pressures of royal expectation. And that, has become one of the monarchy's greatest challenges, because while George's appearances now carry immense symbolic importance, William and Catherine are reportedly determined not to repeat what many believe were the mistakes of previous royal generations. There is growing awareness inside Kensington Palace that emotional resilience matters just as much as constitutional education. According to sources familiar with the family's private approach, George is not simply being taught how to or royal duties, he is being taught how to survive them. That process has reportedly transformed much of his daily life. Royal commentators claim George has already begun receiving more advanced private tutoring focused on constitutional history, diplomacy, and the responsibilities of kingship. Not in overwhelming bursts, but through carefully measured lessons designed to gradually prepare him for the future waiting ahead. Insiders say William has taken an especially active role in those conversations, determined to give his son the emotional guidance he himself often lacked while growing up beneath the glare of the crown. And slowly, the public has begun noticing the difference. At official appearances, George now seems noticeably more composed, more confident, more aware of the expectations surrounding him. Royal staff reportedly describe him as disciplined, thoughtful, and unusually mature for his age. But behind that growing confidence, insiders suggest there is also an increasing understanding within the young prince himself that life will never again be entirely normal. The closer he moves toward the center of royal life, the smaller the distance becomes between childhood and destiny. Through it all, Catherine remains the emotional anchor holding the transition together. Palace aides allegedly view her as the stabilizing force protecting George from becoming overwhelmed by the institution rapidly forming around him. Her calm public presence, insiders whisper, emotional burden of preparing a child for a future defined by duty, sacrifice, and permanent scrutiny. Because unlike any ordinary mother, Catherine is not simply raising a son. She is raising a future king during one of the most uncertain periods the monarchy has faced in generations. And that uncertainty is changing the monarchy itself. Because while George's rise may symbolize continuity for the monarchy, it also signals the arrival of a completely new royal era. William reportedly understands something many royals before him did not. The monarchy cannot survive on tradition alone. According to insiders, George's expanded role is part of a larger modernization strategy designed to secure the crown for the next 50 years. And behind the scenes, aides are calling it one of the most carefully managed royal transitions in modern British history. For decades, the survival of the monarchy depended on ritual, continuity, and the belief that the institution, when Princess Anne emerged, could outlast any crisis simply by remaining unchanged. But insiders claim Prince William views the future very differently. He reportedly believes the crown can no longer rely solely on history to maintain public trust in an age dominated by scrutiny, division, and relentless global attention. And according to palace sources, that belief is now shaping every major decision surrounding Prince George's future role within the royal family. This is not preparation built for the next few years. It is preparation designed for generations. Behind closed doors, Kensington Palace is reportedly orchestrating what some royal commentators have described as a controlled evolution of the monarchy itself. William's vision, according to insiders, centers around a leaner, more disciplined royal structure, one focused less on endless ceremony and more on strategic visibility, public trust, and long-term relevance. And at the center of that strategy stands Prince George, the young heir increasingly viewed not just as the future king but as the symbol of the monarchy's survival in a rapidly changing world. That pressure explains why every public step is being managed so carefully. Reports suggest Kensington Palace has become extraordinarily deliberate about George's growing exposure to public life. Appearances are limited but meaningful. Engagements are selected with precision. Every image, every speech, every interaction is reportedly considered through the lens of long-term constitutional strategy. Insiders claim the goal is not overexposure, but familiarity. The public must gradually see George not merely as William's son, but as a future sovereign capable of carrying the institution forward during uncertain times. And according to royal observers, the strategy appears to be working. Younger audiences who once felt disconnected from the monarchy are reportedly responding more positively to George's presence than palace officials initially expected. His composed appearances beside William and Catherine have created a sense of continuity many insiders believe the monarchy desperately needed after years of scandal, division, and public exhaustion surrounding internal royal conflicts. The palace reportedly understands that George represents something emotionally powerful to the public, stability untouched by past controversies. That symbolism has only increased William's determination to shape the transition carefully. Royal experts now frequently describe William as far more decisive than his father when it comes to institutional planning. While Charles often struggled to balance tradition with modernization, insiders claim William has adopted a far more direct approach behind the scenes. He reportedly believes hesitation is dangerous in the modern media era, where uncertainty quickly becomes instability. And according to sources close to palace operations, that belief has accelerated preparations not only for George's public role, but for the future structure of the monarchy itself. Part of that preparation reportedly extends far beyond Britain. Insiders claim George is gradually being introduced to conversations surrounding diplomacy, Commonwealth relations, and international leadership responsibilities long before most expected. The palace allegedly understands that the future king will inherit a monarchy, operating on a global stage where every gesture carries political and symbolic consequences. This is no longer simply about cuttings and ceremonial appearances. It is about preparing a future sovereign to navigate a world far more volatile than the one Queen Elizabeth II inherited decades ago. And yet, in many ways, it is Elizabeth's example that continues guiding the strategy now unfolding. Several royal historians have noted striking similarities between William's long-term planning and the disciplined institutional mindset that defined Elizabeth II's reign. Stability first, duty above emotion, continuity of chaos. According to insiders, William deeply admires the way his grandmother preserved the crown through decades of political and cultural upheaval, and many believe he is now applying those same principles to George's preparation, only with a modern understanding of media, public opinion, and global perception. But no amount of planning can fully silence the growing unease surrounding the monarchy's future. Because the closer George moves toward the center of royal life, the louder one. A question becomes, has the countdown to the next reign already begun? Across Britain, reactions to Prince George's new role have ranged from admiration to deep unease. Some see a poised young heir stepping courageously into history. Others fear the palace is placing impossible expectations on a child before his teenage years have even begun. But one thing is undeniable. The future of the monarchy now feels closer and far more real than ever before. The announcement did more than dominate. On headlines, it ignited a national conversation about duty, legacy, and the price of growing up inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth. Across television panels, newspaper columns, and social media platforms, the debate intensified almost instantly. Supporters of the monarchy praised what they described as a carefully managed step toward continuity during uncertain times. Critics, however, questioned whether the crown was once again sacrificing childhood in service of survival. Beneath all of it was an unmistakable emotional tension. Many Britons reportedly see echoes of Prince William in George's quiet composure. The same reserved expressions, the same awareness of cameras, the same burden of expectation settling far too early on young shoulders. For older generations especially, the comparisons have reopened memories of another royal child navigating unimaginable pressure beneath the public gaze after the death of Princess Diana. That emotional connection has made reactions to George's expanded role feel intensely personal for millions watching from afar. But the conversation did not remain confined to Britain alone. Across Commonwealth nations, international media outlets dissected every detail surrounding the palace's decision. Commentators in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand questioned whether the monarchy was preparing for a generational shift sooner than officially acknowledged. American networks framed the move as evidence of growing urgency. Inside the House of Windsor, and throughout Europe, royal analysts increasingly describe George's emergence as one of the clearest signs, yet that the institution is quietly preparing for a future beyond King Charles's reign. That global attention has only amplified the pressure surrounding the young prince himself. Supporters of the royal family argue George has handled the spotlight with remarkable maturity for someone so young. Reports from palace insiders frequently describe him as calm, disciplined, and emotionally composed during public appearances. Those qualities, many believe, are precisely why William and Catherine have slowly increased his visibility. The monarchy, according to royal commentators, desperately needs figures capable of restoring emotional trust after years of public division and internal family turmoil. And for many supporters, George represents hope. Polling surrounding Prince William's future reign has reportedly strengthened considerably in recent years. My shine, particularly among younger audiences once considered disconnected from the monarchy entirely. Analysts suggest much of that renewed confidence stems from the image William and Catherine project as parents measured, modern, and emotionally aware in ways previous royal generations often struggled to appear. George, standing beside them, has increasingly become a symbol of continuity untouched by scandal, bitterness, or institutional conflict. Yet not everyone sees the situation through such domestic eyes. Critics continue questioning whether the palace truly understands the emotional toll royal life can inflict on children raised beneath relentless scrutiny. Social media debates have become especially intense, with users drawing comparisons between George's early exposure and the difficult childhood experiences endured by William and Harry decades earlier. Some argue the monarchy has learned from past mistakes. Others fear history may simply be repeating itself under a more polished modern image. That divide reveals something deeper unfolding within public opinion itself. The monarchy today exists in a world radically different from the one Queen Elizabeth II once ruled over. Public patience is thinner. Privacy is almost impossible. Every royal appearance is analyzed in real time by millions of people worldwide. And because of that reality, George's rise has become more than a family story. It has become a reflection of Britain's complicated relationship with the institution itself, part admiration, part anxiety, part desperate hope that stability can survive in an age where almost nothing feels stable anymore. Still, despite the criticism and uncertainty, one truth continues growing clearer with every carefully managed appearance, every constitutional discussion, and every strategic step forward. Prince George is no longer viewed merely as a child standing in line for the throne someday far in the future. To many people across Britain and beyond, he is already beginning to embody the monarchy's next chapter. And as the palace prepares for a defining new chapter, the final question may not be whether George is ready, but whether the monarchy itself is prepared for what comes next. In the end, Prince George's new role is about far more than ceremonial appearances or carefully choreographed palace moments. It is about the survival of an institution that has endured war, scandal, abdication, and tragedy for centuries. Beginning in 2026, the young Prince will step closer than ever to the destiny waiting for him. And according to those inside the palace, this is only the beginning of a transformation that could redefine the monarchy forever. For generations, the British monarchy survived because it understood one fundamental truth. The crown must always appear larger than the crisis surrounding it. Through wars that shattered Europe, family betrayals that threatened the throne, and public scandals that shook the institution to its core, monarchy endured by convincing the nation that continuity would always prevail over chaos. But now, insiders whisper that the House of Windsor is entering one of the most delicate chapters in its modern history, and Prince George's emergence is no longer being viewed simply as preparation for the future. It is being viewed as protection against uncertainty itself. That is why the palace's strategy surrounding George carries such enormous significance. According to royal commentators, his marks the symbolic beginning of an entirely new royal generation. Quietly but unmistakably, the monarchy is shifting away from the era shaped by Queen Elizabeth II and gradually moving toward one defined by William, Catherine, and eventually George himself. Every carefully managed appearance, every constitutional lesson, every public moment beside his parents now forms part of a much larger narrative being constructed behind palace walls, a narrative centered on continuity, survival, and survival has become the institution's greatest priority. The reality facing the monarchy today is far more fragile than palace officials publicly admit. King Charles's reign, while historic in its own right, is increasingly viewed by observers as transitional, a bridge between stability of Elizabeth II's decades-long rule and the uncertain future waiting beyond it. Reports suggest senior royal aides understand that public confidence cannot be allowed to weaken. During this period of change, that is why William and Catherine have reportedly placed such extraordinary focus on preparing George carefully, positioning him not merely as a future sovereign, but as a stabilizing figure capable of emotionally reconnecting the monarchy with younger generations. Because in many ways, George represents something the institution desperately needs right now: hope. Hope that the monarchy can evolve without collapsing beneath the weight of its own history. Hope that future generations will still see value in tradition during an age dominated by skepticism and division. Hope that after years of public family conflict, scandal, and uncertainty, the crown can once again project unity rather than instability. And according to insiders, that emotional symbolism is precisely why George's preparation has become so accelerated, so strategic, and so carefully controlled. Inside royal circles, many now reportedly refer to 2026 as the beginning of the next chapter. My scene emerged not because George will suddenly become a senior royal overnight, but because the psychological transition has already begun. The public is being gradually introduced to the idea of the monarchy's future beyond Charles. William is increasingly stepping into a leadership role once associated solely with the sovereign himself. Catherine has become one of the institution's most trusted and stabilizing figures. And George, still remarkably young, now stands quietly at the center of a transformation. Larger than any one individual. Yet beneath the strategy and symbolism lies something deeply human. A family navigating immense uncertainty beneath relentless global attention. A young boy slowly realizing the life ahead of him was chosen long before he could understand its consequences. Parents attempting to protect their son while simultaneously preparing him for a destiny that will demand sacrifice few people could truly comprehend. And a monarchy fighting to preserve not just its relevance, but its very sense of permanence in a world changing faster than tradition can comfortably withstand. That is why this moment feels so significant to so many watching around the world, because this is no longer merely a story about royal appearances, succession planning, or palace protocol. It is about legacy, about duty, about whether an ancient institution can successfully guide another generation through uncertainty without losing itself in the process. Because within the silent corridors of untruth now echoes louder than ever before, the future king is no longer waiting in the shadows. He is already being prepared for the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.